Okay, so we're going to start part one, the intro to Louisville history, from the Falls of the Ohio to the brink of Civil War. You see the falls there, and you see the Civil War there. So again, this is more just a general overview of Louisville history. We're not going to get into a lot of detail, just sort of a broad brush. And there's part two that we'll be doing later on, and then part three. So now then, why is Louisville here? How did it come to be? And a lot of it has to do with our geology. Back over 10,000 years ago, we had an ice age, believe it or not. We had glaciers. Thank goodness we had global warming, right? Or else we'd still be under a glacier right now. But we had a glacier, we had various erosion over time, and the Ohio River had a crack in it that developed into the Falls of the Ohio. There's the falls, and that's the reason why we exist to this day, because it was so difficult to navigate around the falls back during the riverboat days. And actually it's not like a Niagara Falls, it's more of a series of rapids over a 2-mile length that only drop 26 vertical feet. So it's not, falls is kind of misleading, it's more rapids, if you will, than anything else. And again, talking about the fossils and all, in fact, way back, many, many millions of years ago, we would have been underwater. This was a big ocean as such, and there's, at the Falls of the Ohio, there's the fossil bed there, that literally you can walk, me and my wife did that recently, we walked down to the fossil bed and actually see the fossils. But yeah, and for more information on that, you can go to the Ohio River Interpretive Center, which is really great. Have a lot of good exhibits, talk about the Falls of the Ohio and the fossil beds there. So prior to all the navigational improvements of the Ohio River, during the summer months, the Ohio River pool level became very shallow. So much so that you could walk across the Ohio River without much difficulty. And large animals like bison, elk, and bears used to ford the Ohio River at this point. And a lot of our streets are based on those animal traces, or paths as they're known. So the large animals, the elk, the bears, and the bison would create paths, and we as settlers followed them as well and created our streets based on that. And with that large amount of animals, obviously humans are going to come along to hunt the animals, and there was a large population of Native Americans that lived in this area prior to us Europeans moving in. Primarily the Shawnee Indians lived in this region, and their term for the Ohio River was Beautiful River. We still have traces of Native American settlements here. There's a burial mound out off US 42 in the Sutherland neighborhood area. There's a sign that tells the folks don't play on the mound. Disrespectful. And out at the airport, there used to be a large Native American village there. Back in the early 1970s, they did an archaeological dig out there to find out more about the Native Americans living there. And out at the UPS terminal area, there's a burial mound there as well. So there's still traces of the Native Americans that once lived here, besides our parks were named for the Native Americans as well. Another mound existed down at 6th and Muhammad Ali Boulevard there. It was more of a ceremonial mound. I don't think it was a burial mound per se. And someone actually built a house on top of that burial mound. And it was removed back in the 1830s, that burial mound. So we talked about the Native Americans living here. So European settlers started to come here during the 1760s and 1770s. And initially they came by a land route known as the Wilderness Road. So the pioneers would come through the Cumberland Gap, up into Kentucky, and on over to the Falls of the Ohio. again, they would follow the animal paths to get here. There's some images of them fording the Cumberland Gap and coming into to the Kentucky region. The Native Americans were not too happy about us Europeans moving into the area, and there were numerous accounts of Indian attacks and settlers being killed by the Indians. Abraham Lincoln's grandfather was killed during an Indian attack out near Middletown, Kentucky, and thank goodness his father, Thomas, survived that Indian attack. But there were a lot of conflicts between Native Americans and the settlers as we moved into the region here. Consequently, they built what was known as, they were called stations, but they were actually small forts that they built along Beargrass Creek. So you see some names of the Floyd stations, Floyd's Fork Station, Low Dutch Station, Lynn Station. And Beargrass Creek was very strategic in settling this region because when you think about it, you needed good, clean drinking water for settlers. And so they would locate along the various forks of Beargrass Creek. They would build these stations adjacent to Beargrass Creek for the water. One of them, Floyd Station, was built by John Floyd. He was in the Revolutionary Army. He also was a surveyor and had a station named for him where he lived. He was over at Breckenridge Lane near the Jamestown Apartments. So here's where Floyd Station was, Breckenridge Lane there, Waterson Expressway. So John Floyd lived in this general vicinity here. Unfortunately for John Floyd, his life was cut short on April 12th, 1783, when he was out doing a survey and Indians attacked his group. Unfortunately, John Floyd was wearing a bright red coat, which made him an easy target. And I think he was only 32 years old when he was killed. He's buried there behind the Jamestown Apartments off Prince William Street. This is a cemetery in which he's buried there. There's his grave site. And John Floyd left a big legacy here in the community. A lot of things, if you hear of anything named Floyd, it's more than likely connected to John Floyd. Floyd's Fork, the big creek that's out beyond where we're at currently, out beyond the Snyder Freeway. Even the J.B. Speed Art Museum is connected to John Floyd. The Bowman Field Airport area was connected to John Floyd. The Shelby Park neighborhood. I put together this little genealogy chart here which kind of tracks the connection from John Floyd all the way down to other aspects of today's development. So even though he lived a very brief life, he had a long legacy. John Floyd was, as mentioned earlier, he was a surveyor, as well as several other folks that are listed here on this diagram. And so when the British were here, prior to us becoming Americans, the British divided up the land into land grants to give as compensation for those British subjects who fought in the French and Indian Wars of the 1760s. And so in 1774, John Floyd and Hancock Taylor and several others surveyed this region here, the Louisville region, and broke it up into tracts of land that were given to British subjects. Now if you look at the one up here in the center, it says John Connolly, 2,000 acres. That's where downtown Louisville currently is existing. So who was John Connolly, and why aren't we called Connollyville instead of Louisville? Well, the reason why is when George Rogers Clark came here in 1778, during the Revolutionary War, John Connolly was here, and George Rogers Clark asked Connolly, what side of the war are you on? Are you on the British side or the American side? Conley chose wrong. He chose the British side. So George Rogers Clark expelled him up to Canada, where he subsequently died, and George Rogers Clark took over his land grant. So we no longer remember who John Conley was. So here's some more connections here. Thomas Jefferson was governor of Virginia at the time, and he sent his good friend George Rogers Clark. They were born in the same county in Virginia, both Jefferson and Clark were. And so Jefferson sent Clark here to this region of Kentucky to protect it during the Revolutionary War. By the way, Kentucky became a state in 1792. We were all Virginians prior to that. As noted, Clark first settled on Corn Island, which no longer exists. It vanished into the Ohio River many years ago. And then Clark moved on shore with another fort here, Revolutionary Fort, that really established Louisville. Again, they were fighting both the British, the Native Americans. They had a lot to fear when they first came here just to survive. And so forts were very integral into their establishment of a settlement here. So here's another little map of Louisville in 1780, showing where Corn Island was, fort on shore. Beargrass Creek was nearby as well, where it came into the Ohio. So why are we named Louisville? Well, we're named for King Louis XVI. However you pronounce his name is how you pronounce our name. Whether it's Louisville, Louisville. And this statue, which used to be down at, I think it was 6th and Jefferson, which has since been removed due to some damage that it experienced during some protests a few years ago. But anyways, the statue here is a direct connection to our founder, King Louis XVI. It was commissioned by his daughter, and it was donated to us by Montpellier, France, back in the 1950s. But King Louis funded the American Revolution, and that's the reason why we're named Louisville. I'm sure somewhere there's a document between Thomas Jefferson and George Rogers Clark saying, hey, name this new city after our benefactor in France. But anyways, that's how...
Can I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead.
Did the Indiana side of the river, did that develop around the same time along with Louisville? Or
not quite. It developed a little bit later on, but yeah, by the late 1790s, Jeffersonville and New Albany. In fact, New Albany was a fairly decent-sized city in the early 1800s. In fact, it was almost the capital of Indiana back in the early 1800s. But yeah, it somewhat developed, and that was, and we'll talk about the Portland Canal, which really established the Louisville side, because if Indiana could have put the canal on their side of the river, then they probably would have grew faster than Louisville did. But anyways, yes, somewhat a little bit later on, but Louisville got the canal first, and that really made us go faster. I'll discuss that in just a few minutes here.
Sure.
Again, we're named for our county is named for Thomas Jefferson, who was the governor of Virginia when the county was formed. When Thomas Jefferson became president of the United States in the early 1800s, he asked George Rogers Clark to lead an expedition out to the northwest portion of the country, which they had just acquired through what was called the Louisiana Purchase. They had just acquired that in 1802 or so, the Louisiana Purchase, and Jefferson just wanted to know, hey, what's out there? Let's send out an expedition at this new part of the country we acquired. So he wanted Clark to do that, but Clark told Jefferson he was a little bit too old for that, but to send his younger brother, William, to do the expedition, which they did in 1803. And the Lewis and Clark expedition actually started here and ended here. Even though St. Louis built a huge arch, both Meriwether Lewis and William Clark initially met in just across the river in Clarksville, Indiana. And then they came back here and they separated from here. So they really, the Lewis and Clark expedition has a lot to do with the Louisville region. And I have an image here of York, the slave of William Clark, who went on that expedition. He was pretty well documented about his exploits. But the Lewis and Clark expedition was pretty major back in the early 1800s. Now then, talking about the steamboat travel. First steamboat came here in 1811. It was very difficult to get up and down the Ohio River, primarily due to the Falls of the Ohio. But so not only was the land route important to get people here, but now they can really travel by the river with the steamboats. Louisville became a city in 1828, and John Buckland was our first mayor. Served 5 consecutive one-year terms. Can you believe that? That's a lot of campaigning there. And the Falls of the Ohio are the only natural break in the long length of the Ohio River. So now then, the Portland Canal. The Louisvillians and Indiana realized that whoever could build the canal first would be more successful. And they started in the 1820s to build the canal and finally had it completed in 1830, which was almost 200 years ago, to bypass the falls and facilitated the Ohio River transportation. Today, the McAlpin Lock and Dam is a pretty major league transportation fixture there. You can see how many tons it takes. 54 million tons of goods. I understand that, I think, if I have this correct, it transports more material through it than the Panama Canal.
Wow.
Through the McAlpin Lock and Dams. Now I'm constantly seeing barges go up and down the Ohio, especially the coal barges. Takes a lot of semi-trailer trucks off the interstates. Here are some of the significant buildings that still exist to this day from early Louisville. The Bank of Louisville up there in the upper left-hand corner, 1837. It's now known as Actors Theater. The Paget House, which just recently was restored, it was started construction in the 1790s. Locust Grove, also 1790. Farmington, the Old House, and Howard Hardy House. All of those buildings still exist, some of the very few from that time period of the early 1800s. Christ Church Cathedral is the oldest church in the area. Parts of it were built in 1822. That's 200 years ago. We were also a slave state, and a major slave trading center. The Otterburn brothers were pretty well known for their slave pens down on Main Street near 3rd Street, I think, is 2nd and 3rd area that they had. Pretty bad times back in those days. And when Lincoln came here in 1841, it really impacted him to see the slave trade. He was just a boy when he grew up in Kentucky, and then he went to Indiana, then on over to Illinois. So he really didn't encounter slaves too much during his formative years. But when he came to Louisville and stayed at the Speed plantation there at Farmington, is when he really encountered what the slave culture was really like. It really impacted him later in his political life. When Lincoln came here, there were still some reminders of some of the things he might have seen when he was here in 1841. For instance, he might have gone to the old Bank of Louisville to have a financial transaction. He went by the Cave Hill Farm, which is now Cave Hill Cemetery. He went down Bardstown Pike. He stayed at Farmington. And he is known to have visited some of his neighbors here at the Bray House and Hayfield Historic House. So those two homes still exist. And there's documentation that he visited his neighboring residents there. And some of the others, he might have gone to Christ Church Cathedral, perhaps for religious service, Howard Hardy House and the Old House. They all existed during that time. And he also, more than likely, went down and saw the new courthouse being built, which is Jefferson County Courthouse. It was being built between 1830 and 1860. So he more than likely, being a lawyer, wanted to see what was up with that. So again, Lincoln stayed here at Farmington for 2 weeks in late August of 1841. And you can find out more about it by going to Farmington. James Guthrie was a big civic booster of Louisville in the mid-1800s. He helped the Portland Canal get constructed, helped build the first bridge across the Ohio River, courthouse. He was an advocate for that. He was president of L Indian Railroad, and I always blame him for the UK U of L feud because he helped start the University of Louisville. So always give Guthrie some credit, and there's a small street in downtown Louisville named for him. As noted earlier, Cave Hill Cemetery was built in 1848. When it was first built, the map there on the left is the original design of Cave Hill. It was only 90 acres of land. Today it's 300 acres of land. So Cave Hill has grown as well over the years. We actually have a president of the United States from the Louisville area. Even though he was born in Virginia, he was only 1 year old when his family moved here to the Louisville area. So I think we can claim him more than Virginia can. His home, Springfield, still exists out of Brownsboro Road and Blankenbaker Lane area. He died in 1850 and is buried in the mausoleum there in the National Cemetery, also off Brownsboro Road. He's known primarily for his role in the Mexican War of 1848, in which there's some controversy about how he went from the United States into Mexico. Some of you may have heard some of the controversy about that. Supposedly back in those days, the U.S. Army was not supposed to go outside the borders of America. They were only to be a defensive army and not an offensive army. And he disregarded those orders, and he went across the Rio Grande to pursue Santa Anna's army and defeated them there in Mexico. So it's somewhat controversial, and we're still kind of living with those consequences today with the immigration that's going on today. I won't get into all the political aspects of that, but Taylor was involved in the early parts of that conflict with Mexico. The Illinois Railroad began in the 1850s and really propelled Louisville growth even more between the south and the north. Cathedral of the Assumption was built in 1852. Still magnificent, phenomenal cathedral. Part of that was the riot that happened in August 6, 1855. That's about 170 or so years ago. It was native Louisvillians did not like the immigrants coming into Louisville and taking all the jobs and political power and all that. They were rioting against the Irish, the Catholics, the Germans. So the native Louisvillians did not like all these immigrants coming into Louisville. And I'm glad now, 170 years later, we've solved all the immigration issues. We no longer have these conflicts going on. Everything's fine and dandy. But yeah, back in 1855, though, it was a major issue. So thank goodness that's been solved. 1855, aerial illustration of Louisville. I'm not sure who is the artist for this, but it is just phenomenal, the detail that this illustration has. We as historians still refer to this map. So when you look at it, I have indicated Broadway up here at the upper part of the map. It was once known as Dunkirk, then as Prather, but beyond Broadway was all rural, all That was the suburbs back in those days, beyond Broadway. If you look closely at this map, you'll see there's the Jefferson County Courthouse here. The Cathedral of the Assumption's right there. So you can really pick out buildings on this map. And you can see how Beargrass Creek came into downtown, and it emptied at 3rd and the Ohio River. And I'll talk about that in just a second here, what they did with that here shortly. But anyways, great map of Louisville, 1855 aerial. Again, the artist, I'm not sure who he was or she was, but phenomenal depiction of the city. How they put all that into their mind back in those days, I don't know. Crazy. 1855, the Kentucky School for the Blind was also located on the Clifton campus. Major institution, not only in Louisville, but nationally and internationally. They had the printing house for the blind there as well. And they've just broken ground on the new Helen Keller addition to it. They're having a major museum built that's going to house Helen Keller's archives here at the Kentucky School for the Blind. So still going strong some 170 years later. Love this map. It's the 1858 map of Louisville. And you can't tell much. I'll show you another image here shortly. But this Bergman guy who did this, get his first name, but Bergman, it's called the Bergman map. And he and his associates, I take it, went to every property owner in Jefferson County and noted where everyone lived and where all the major streets were, the residential locations. It's just a phenomenal sort of Rosetta Stone of Louisville of 1858. We can really understand who owned what per this map. I'll show you a little bit more detail. And by the way, you can get on it. You can get on your own computers to look it up. Just go to the Library of Congress website. It's loc.gov and put in 1858 map of Louisville, and it'll pop up on your computer screen. And here's some of the detail that it has. This is of the St. Matthews area here, but you can see where Shelbyville Road was, where the railroad, which still exists at that location, Westport Road going out that direction, Oxmoor right here, just Breckenridge, all the major streets of the St. Matthews area are there. A lot of famous names in this area, the Brown family, Brown's Lane and all. And you can zoom in and out, you can really find the detail. I use this map a lot on a regular basis to figure out who lived where in 1858 and what has changed since then. Also in 1858, the fire department was established. Very important, it was professional. Up until 1858, it was all volunteer, kind of haphazard. If your house caught on fire, they may or may not show up. You know, or whether or not you paid them to show up. You had to pay the volunteers to show up. But by 1858, we realized we needed a paid fire department, and you can see they're all there rough and ready to roll. But yeah, that really helped the city a lot when that was established.
Do you have an approximate population number for Louisville back then?
Back in 1858?
Yeah.
I don't know. I know in part 2 I go over the population amount, so I have to let you know, but I want to say, gosh, I'm trying to think. No, I can't think off the top of my head. I discussed it though in part 2 because it's very strategic, the population growth in those areas.
Okay.
1858, also a Christian Heigold built this ornate house in what was known as the Point neighborhood. And the facade has since been saved, and it's there at Frankfort Avenue and River Road. A number of years ago, I put together this graphic that highlights why the facade is so patriotic. Christian Heigold, so this was 3 years after Bloody Monday and the riots of that era. Christian Heigold was from Germany. And the Native Louisvillians weren't so happy about the Germans being in Louisville. So Christian Heigold, to show that he was full-blooded American, he loved this country, built this house with all these patriotic themes on it to say, hey, I'm as American as you are. I love this country. And one of the odd trivia parts of this is up here in the crown of the facade is a bust of President James Buchanan, who was president from 1857 to 1861. To our knowledge, this is the only national memorial to James Buchanan in the United States. This is the only reference to him that we're aware of. But anyways, it has all sorts of different patriotic themes I put together. I kept hearing about all these themes, so one day I actually went down to the facade, analyzed it, and came up with all what you see there, why it's so important. So in 1860, they built the Louisville Water Tower down at Zorn and River Road. Hopefully everyone has seen our beautiful classical architecture of this water tower. And so you might think about it back in those days. They did not have automobiles or things of that nature, or even much streetcars. They used just horse and buggy to get around. So if you were traveling on a horse and buggy from 6th and Jefferson, where our city hall is, out to Zorn and River Road, it may take you 20-25 minutes, depending on your equestrian skills, to get out to this remote location. So this was way, way far away from downtown Louisville. It's almost like where we're at today. We are about 20-25 minutes from downtown Louisville. They built it that far out away from downtown. So why would they have done that? Why would they have built such a beautiful architectural piece that no one saw? Basically, the Louisvillians would never see this. The reason why is it was built upstream from downtown Louisville, primarily because to get clean water, because they had relocated Beargrass Creek from 3rd and River up to north of Frankfort Avenue area. And so they wanted to put a new water source up away from Beargrass Creek. And another reason for making this beautiful monument is all the steamboats. Remember, traffic was primarily steamboat back in those days. So you had all these people coming down from Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, from the Northeast, looking for a great place in which to live on the western frontier of the United States. So as they're coming down the Ohio River, the first thing they see is this magnificent water tower saying, hey, it's a big symbol saying we've got clean water here. This is a great place in which to drink water, live, and grow. And so I think it's the same symbology as the Gateway Arch in St. Louis, that this was a symbol to those people on the steamboats saying, live here in Louisville. It's a big advertisement, if you will. That's my theory, and I'm holding to it. But that's the only reason why I think they would have done such a beautiful building in this manner. Also, we had our Jefferson County Courthouse that was built in 1860. Big, magnificent courthouse. It was huge, as big as the state capitol. In fact, it's been alleged that perhaps this was to be the state capitol at some point, but it never was. Then on April 14th, 1861, Fort Sumter was attacked and the Civil War began. Our connection to it was Robert Anderson. He was a commandant of Fort Sumter at the time of the attack, and he was born at a soldier's retreat, which is out off Hurstburn Parkway. So Robert Anderson, a native Louisvillian, was there integral to the start of the Civil War. So he actually took the flag down and he surrendered the fort to the Confederates after the battle. And then after the war was over back in 1865, he came back to Fort Sumter, took the same flag, and raised it back up. So Robert Anderson. By the way, I went to Arlington Cemetery one time to find out where Robert Anderson was buried. So I go up to the information their desk at Arlington. I said, hey, where's Robert Anderson buried? Thinking that, hey, he's pretty famous, they should know where he's at, right? And they go, we have 300 Robert Andersons here. Which one are you exactly looking for? So I said, oh gosh, I got to figure this out. Turns out he wasn't buried in Arlington, he was buried at West Point, up at the Academy up there in New York. And I've actually been to his gravesite there. But anyways, Robert Anderson, native of Louisville, integral to the start of the Civil War.
At West Point, they have a monument to the Civil War, but it's not called the Civil War. It's the War of the Rebellion.
Insurrection, huh?
Yes.
I got you. That makes sense also. By the way, Anderson is buried right next to another famous general, George Custer is buried right next to Robert Anderson. And why would they have buried George Custer next to Robert Anderson? Or why is he even at West Point? Why would they have put George Custer of Custer's Last Stand, the Battle of the Little Bighorn? Why would they have buried him? The only reason why I think they did that is as a reminder to the cadets there, do not lead your people into battle and get them all killed, basically. Because on Custer's headstone it says all in his command were killed, 202 people. But anyways, he's right next to Robert Anderson there, which I thought was kind of strange. But anyways, but yes, West Point, beautiful campus, a lot of, just if you've never been to West Point, highly recommend it, beautiful area, the Hudson River and all that. Oh. So anyways, here's our chronology at the end of part 1. So we started out as to why Louisville was formed, geologically, due to the glaciers and to the falls of the Ohio. Talked about the indigenous people that lived here previously. Talked about the settlers coming in, the Indian attacks, the forts, John Floyd, some of the initial construction of the houses, the Lewis and Clark expedition, going back into Portland Canal being built, Abraham Lincoln, James Guthrie, Zachary Taylor, Illinois Railroad, Bloody Monday, and all down to the water tower and all. So we covered about 10,000 to 100,000 years of Louisville history in about a half hour or so. So anyways, hopefully you enjoyed all that. Any questions before we head out here? I will find out about the population. We'll discuss that on the next one. But gosh, I'm just going through my mind. I just don't want to throw out a number without being certain of that amount. But yeah, part 2 will be going from the Civil War up to 1923, and then part 3 from, in fact I've got it there, part 3 will be from 1924 up to today.
Do you know if the population figures would include slaves or not? Did they calculate that
Oh
way?
yeah, you're right. That's a good question as well. I think my population census starts in 1860. So, but yeah, I'll find that out. That's a good question.
They used to count slaves as 3/4.
Yeah, 3/5 or something like that. Something like that. But whether or not that census in 1860 includes that, I don't want to find that out. That's a good point. But you're exactly right. Okay, well, thank y'all very much. And